The ZIP emphasized that persons involved in the rearing of livestock need to think as
it is the intention of government to give deliberate attention to all levels of education from
watch. In preparation for any eventuality, EMAC, the nationally
until end brand, who will actually make it true? Will the tables be turned?
Money, like at the top moon, but la Messi go hotel here, labor.
City that appeals to locals and visitors alike is set to contain
as many as our opinions behind, as many as will become opinions,
Hello and a very warm welcome to you. This is another edition of Issues and Answers. We are happy that you are joining us. And today we are looking at climate change and its impact, particularly on food and nutritional security. And to discuss this with me, to my immediate right, we have Mr. Steve Maxime. He's an eco-consultant. And we have a face, no stranger to this program, Mr. Crispin Duvain. He's the Chief Sustainable Development and Environmental Officer. And on the far end is Mr. Cletus Alexander, who is an agricultural officer. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I want to begin with you. Mr. Maxime. What brings you to St. Lucia this time around?
Well, I'm glad you said this time around because I'm no stranger to St. Lucia. I'm here as an eco-consultant looking at climate-smart agriculture. There's a regional project on that's facilitated by ICA and IFAD, which is the International Foundation for Agricultural Development. And I'm here to ostensibly just get a pulse for what the response has been like to climate change within the agricultural sector.
What have you found out thus far?
Well, without letting the cat out of the bag too much, I found out that the impacts here are similar to what I've found in St. Vincent and St. Kitts and Nevis. It's primarily driven by lack of rainfall, the increased unpredictability of the weather, and I want to take this opportunity to say that it matters not whether you think it's actually climate change or weather variability. Whatever is happening now. So we need to do something now. We need to do something now about it. So I found that mostly we're talking about increased heat stress, unpredictability of the rainfall, poor food set, a whole range of issues. But it's not all bad news. There are a lot of really good things going on, and I hope during the course of the program you'll be able to talk about some of them.
Yeah, and I think it's really good to allow people to know that because it's not all bad news.
Oh, no, it's not all bad.
Certainly. Mr. Duvey, how involved, well, I know the SDD is very much involved in issues pertaining to climate change, but just to give our listeners some idea as to what the SDD has been doing over the years.
The Sustainable Development and Environment Division, which is now under the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Energy, Science and Technology, is the focal agency responsible for coordination of national climate change matters. And our work ranges from preparing for and participating in international climate change negotiations to actually coordinating activities on the ground, to also providing policy advice to the policy directorate for further decision making. So it's a broad range, and we're particularly keen on seeing things happen on the ground. It's not just a matter of policy and and a lot of other esoteric stuff, as much as trying to make a difference in people's lives with respect to climate change.
Mm-hmm. Now, just before I move on to Mr. Alexander, in terms of climate change, what does the scientific data say? I mean, we know that the climate has changed, but what is it that we are hearing from, for example, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change?
Good question. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, is just about to release its final report in a few months on its fifth assessment report on the state of play with regard to climate change. They've already released a series of reports. And basically what they're saying is that we can see a significant change in temperature. We can see a significant change in water availability around the world. It underscores the fact that small island developing states such as ours are particularly vulnerable to climate change. And it does reflect the fact that there will be impacts on agriculture, many of them not so positive. And there'll be issues with regard to the rate at which agricultural pests multiply and so on. So there's a lot of impacts, most so much, and for us are not such good news.
Yeah, because when we look at life and development of any country, we need to speak about food and nutritional security. So certainly agriculture is pivotal. I'm talking about the way forward. Cletus, as an agricultural officer, do you think that the farmers, what is it that the farmers are experiencing these days as compared to like years ago, many years ago?
As we all know, agriculture is very dependent on climate. And over the past few years, we have realized that the dry season is getting more intense. The rainy season also is getting much shorter. Yes, it's shorter, but you have short periods of intensive rainfall. And you also find a situation where you are not able to plan properly, because if you are targeting certain markets, there are certain crops that you're looking at. And in terms of establishing your crops and so on, the climate has a very important part to play in crop establishment and monitoring also. So I'll say, well, the farmers out there, they have realized that, and then it's time that they put some adaptation and mitigation measures in place.
I want to ask another question. The farmers have made that realization in terms of maybe more intense dry seasons, probably a little less rainfall, but notwithstanding intense weather variability. But have they been able to link this at all to climate change? Or have you all been able to make that connection to them?
Yes, we have, because as I said, the type of farming that was being done, say, 40 years ago, there you were able, it was like a routine thing. You know what would have happened throughout the year. But now we cannot do that. The farmers cannot. Because when you're expecting rain, you're not getting rain. Take, for example, this year, we're in July, end of July, and we seem not to be getting any rain. We're in the rainy season, so how can you plan for this? So they have realized that, yes, they have made that link between the climate change and climate variability in terms of how it affects them and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Out of the information that you're going to be gathering here in St. Lucia and perhaps throughout the region, what really is the ultimate plan?
The ultimate plan is that the IFAD, the International Foundation for Agricultural Development, is considering developing a regional project. But this project is going to be geared towards satisfying felt needs out there. And we are taking the pulse of the farming population and the population generally. Because I want to re-emphasize that climate smart agriculture is not about the agricultural sector. Climate smart agriculture is about the country. Because every single person is affected by what happens with climate change and with the agricultural sector. I've found far too often that in conversations like these, nationally televised conversations like these, there's a tendency to believe that we are talking about agriculture. We are talking about life in this country. If you're a hotelier and you're sitting there thinking, well, if there's not enough local production, we'll probably import it, you're facing an industry that is sensitive to climate change. You have airport passenger taxes now, and people know that they're paying extra money to mitigate, to nullify the impact of their flying. They don't want to eat food that flew the same distance they did. So the whole concept of food miles is putting an additional flip to agricultural production. So that's why I said the news isn't all bad. I mean, we're being forced to look now at local production, not just from an economic standpoint, but from an environmental and climate change standpoint as well. So there, as I said, it's a mixed bag, and I think that what will come out of all of this is a project that will address some of the concerns, whether it be in better methods of harvesting water, because rainwater harvesting is at the top of the agenda in all islands, because all our agriculture is rainfall driven. Mm-hmm. the island territories do not have lakes and, and standing bodies of water, so that low rainfall, no recharge of those springs or no recharge of your dams, that's it. We're in real trouble.
Okay, we will take a break right now, but when we come back, of course, we'll continue this very interesting discussion. I just thank you for being with us. We'll be back with you shortly.
Agriculture, one of the pillars of St. Lucia's economic development, creating opportunities for earning a living for the farmer and his family. From the field to the kitchen, the St. Lucians are finding creative ways of using fruits, crops, and vegetables grown locally, from local seasonings to special brews, from aquaculture to the cultivation of local herbs for export. A strong agriculture industry strengthens the economy. The country needs your support, so buy local.
Thank you very much for staying with Issues and Answers. We are discussing climate change in light of food and nutritional security. Oftentimes we speak about food security, but it's very much linked to nutritional security as well. And just to move from where we left off with Steve Crispin, I think you wanted to add something to what he said.
Well, I just wanted to make the point that food and nutritional security, while we're speaking primarily agriculture, land-based food production, there are the IPCC, which I mentioned earlier, has pronouncements of projections for the oceans, which are also a major source of food and nutrition for Caribbean peoples. And we need to know that our coral reefs support fisheries and their ocean, their pelagic species that are further out at sea, which will also be affected by climate change, and ocean acidification, I should also mention. So these are things we need to note.
Okay. I just want to ask to speak to an initiative, Crispin, that is currently on the ground in a very real way. That is the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, which is linked to the pilot program for climate resilience, in terms of what government as an entity is doing on the ground in St. Lucia to help build climate resilience.
Yes, the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Program, there's a component within it called the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, which is funded under the Climate Investment Funds. And the program is administered through the World Bank, but being implemented at the national level in St. Lucia and a number of other Caribbean countries. And as you said, it is really meant to build resilience. And it is looking at building resilience in terms of a number of activities on the ground. It's not just not theoretical, it's actually looking at watershed management. We're looking at rainwater harvesting. We're looking at coral reef rehabilitation and so on. All of these, will have some relevance to agriculture and food and nutritional security. And so that project is actually about to be rolled out in full phase in the next few months. But we have been doing the preliminary work to lay the groundwork. And one of the critical things I have to say about that project is that it has a significant public education and awareness component. We should be targeting, people at different levels, at the community level, at the national level, at the policy level, and the whole issue of food security and and how climate change affects that, and what we can do to respond and try to maintain or improve our food security in the face of climate change. These things will, there'll be the possibilities, the opportunity to bring information to people and also to receive information from people as to what they've been doing in terms of best practice and so on.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt this is really a very serious issue. I kind of really like what you said. It's about now. It's about doing things now. It's about acting now. It is not something that is going to happen. It is not something that we need to take time to respond to. The response has to be now because the phenomenon is happening as we speak. Cletus, I want to ask you about the farmers on the ground and the practicing of climate smart agriculture. Do they need new technologies? Are they aware as to what is it that they could do to adapt, in this era of climate change?
Yes, I'll not say it's new technology alone that we need. Because what we have done is we had before what we call indigenous practices. The farmers before, they knew, don't fool yourself, they knew a lot about climate change. And they had certain structures in place that would make them adapt to climate change. But what we have done is that We have neglected these practices and realize and say, well, we bring in new ones, technologies that are not appropriate for ourselves. So what we need to do is we need to adopt those technologies that we think that will make an impact out there. Not because of technology's sake, we'll just bring any technology. And I know the farmers out there, they are engaged in a number of very important technologies that are making them more resilient to climate impacts and so on. Take, for example, irrigation. We have now, before farmers used to use a lot of what they call sprinklers, an overhead sprinkler irrigation system. Yes, they have more water at the time, but the drip system that is being introduced right now, it's more efficient than the overhead sprinklers, where with drip irrigation you tend to apply the water where it is needed at the root zone of the plant. And there, since we know well now the amount of water that we have, it's limited. So we encourage the farmers to manage the water resources much better than they did before. So I must say, well, it's work in progress. It's not perfect, but we're working towards it.
I want to ask, how amenable are they? But before I even ask that question for you to respond to it, I like the point of going back to indigenous methods. Because in a recent discussion, I listened to Dr. Pulwati, who is a member of the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and he was talking about a paradigm shift, about going back to indigenous methods, indigenous ways of doing things. And one of them, for example, well, he didn't mention that one, but composting. Are farmers looking at this?
Sure, we have a number of farmers now. As you know, composting and manure management, that's a serious emitter of greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. With compost, you tend to emit a lot of, if you don't manage your compost, a lot of methane into the atmosphere. And methane is a major greenhouse gas. So I must, yes, composting is a very important part of climate smart agriculture. Because in the agricultural sector, in terms of mitigation against climate change, we merely are engaging two major policies. These are abatement, where you try to reduce your greenhouse gases, and carbon sequestration, where you encourage farmers like to engage in more agroforestry programs where, yes, you have your crops, but the tree crops that you have, they're going to store because they act as a very important sink, what they call sink, for carbon dioxide and so on. So yes, the farmers out there, yes, they need to be educated more on the subject of climate change, but gradually we introducing those new technologies and so on that will help in terms of guaranteeing our food security and nutritional security for the people of St. Lucia.
Fantastic. Steve, I want you to speak a little more, just to dovetail from where he left off, the idea of food security and nutritional security. Are they the same? What is the difference between the two? And how significant is that in terms of the way forward?
This is a particular hobby horse for me. I have serious difficulty with all this talk about food security that is devoid of any discussion on nutrition. Because if we stick to the traditional definition of food security and calorific intake, a 2,000 calorie diet can be obtained from 20 soft drinks, I suppose, and a proper meal. And I think nutrition security deals with getting the proper nutrition, getting those calories from the right sources, not getting them from the so-called empty calories, sugar and all your proponents of NCDs, your non-communicable diseases, and so that it's a very involved discussion. In my consultancy, I am dealing primarily with the nutritional aspects, with the health aspects, not just the agricultural sector. The people I'm interviewing here in St. Lucia would include the chief nutritionist, Lisa Hunt Mitchell, a whole range of people, because we recognize, ICA and IFAD recognizes that climate smart agriculture is just good agricultural practices. I was also happy to hear Cletus say that, we're going back to our roots. It's just a sexy name because that is where the funding is. And we have to be realistic, the climate smart agriculture is just good old-fashioned, good agricultural practices, where you didn't waste water, where you compost it. And another hobby horse I have is composting. If you give me 1 second to talk about that, because in my working in 14 CARICOM countries, my big disappointment has been that what we call composting here in the region is really collecting scraps at the back of your yard. People tell you, I have a compost. No, you have a rat apartment. Once you put scraps of meat and so on, and you don't turn it properly, it's properly set, you're not really composting. You have glorified mulch maybe, but you're not composting. And I think we need to spend more time doing proper composting. I'm familiar with some countries where the solid waste management company is now providing compost. So they come around, all your tree cuttings and so you put them on the side of the road, you get the solid waste management people to chip it and turn it into compost, and then you go back and buy that. Because one of the things that used to upset me in the old days is to go to upscale supermarkets and see middle class people buying horse manure from Canada. It's flower grower. It's called flower grower, but it's already horse manure in a bag. Right. And they're putting that right next to their groceries, and everybody is very comfortable to do that. But they're not prepared to buy locally produced compost because it came from rubbish. And that's that kind of issue. So that it affords us quite an opportunity now under the rubric of climate smart agriculture, which is where the funding is, to be able to do the traditional things. Okay. And I really want to compliment Keith on reminding us about that.
All right, it's a good point to take a break. This is Issues and Answers. Stay with us. We'll be back with you shortly.
St. Lucia, our home. St. Lucia represents different things to each of us. What do you like about St. Lucia?
Strong communities,
natural resources,
thriving industries,
democracy,
national pride,
our unique culture,
creativity.
While we may all have different views, we can work together to build a stronger nation. Let us each play our part.
Welcome back to Issues and Answers. We're very happy that you've stayed with us. We're discussing climate smart agriculture. And of course, when we talk about climate change, it's about everything. It affects everyone in every sector. I want to ask Crispin, that when we talk about building resilience, yes, we know of the hardcore projects in terms of constructing or reconstructing of bridges and all of that and building back better. But under the DVRP, PPCR, there's a component that deals with assisting people with finances or financing. Can you speak a little bit?
Well, there is a component known as the CAF, Climate Adaptation Financing Facility, which is aimed at providing financial resources, at lower than standard interest rates. So that's to the public, civil society, to businesses to undertake climate change related activities.
And farmers will be included in that as well.
Yes, they will have access to those resources. It's still being developed, but it is a component we hope will be launched in the not too distant future. So, of course, there'll also be a list of what constitutes a climate relevant activity. So you can't just borrow that money to do any and everything, but it will be something that is aimed at building climate resilience in your operations and so on. So that is something, and it's actually a how do I say a prototype, because it's actually been looked at with interest by a number of other countries, because when we proposed it a few years ago, and we were trying to get our pilot program for climate resilience project approved, and we presented that there was a great degree of excitement because it had not been it was kind of a novel idea. So we're really hoping to derive some good things out of it.
Okay. Steve, I listened to a quote from the Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerritt, at the last, or the most recent, as it were, heads of government gathering. And he said that the OECS as the sub-region imports some $2 billion of food annually. As somebody on the ground in the agricultural industry, what do you think that we can do, or do you think that we can do anything in the region? And I'm speaking here from not only the perspective of St. Lucia, but from the regional perspective. What can we do, if anything, given the era of climate change, to be able to feed ourselves a lot more? That's Cletus.
Right. In terms of increasing food production and so on, as we said, agriculture is very dependent on climate change. If you check all the predictions that are made, there's going to be a severe reduction in precipitation and increase in temperature. So if there is going to be reduction in precipitation, it means, we have to, because plants get the source of water from the soil. So we have, number one, we have to improve our soil management practices. Remember I told you about some indigenous practices that was adopted before, like we have to now use what they call planting pits. So whatever little rain that you have during the dry season, it's going to be stored around the root area, because now it's not flat. You have what's like a pit, a little hole. You put your manure, and the manure will help in retention of the soil moisture. And when it rains, that water is going to stay right there in the root area. Now, right now, we have to also invest on varieties. Varieties that are now more tolerant to heat stress and also water stress. If you don't do that now, I can't see you with an era of increasing temperature and so on, you'll be able to feed yourself. Also, in terms of land preparation, you have to improve right now on this thing. So right now what you see, if you drive around in the dry season, you see farmers clear the area, bare soil. And what you have now is so dry. That is mere land degradation. You have to improve on all those practices. You can't expose the soil to the elements. So what you're causing? More accelerated erosion. Take, for example, for months we have not had rain. That little rain we have this morning, you can imagine what impact that is having on the soil out there. It's exposed, it's dry, and if it's dry, obviously any little rain is going to wash it away. Wind erosion, we have to guard against this thing. As I said, food security is very, very important. It's not about food production alone, it's about access. Everybody out there have to have access to food. That's a human right. So we have a long way to go in terms of guaranteeing our food production. Take, for example, before, after a crop was harvested, what was done? The farmers used to, the old men, they used to take the seeds, store it, and then use it again. But now what we have, we tend to bring a lot of varieties from overseas. We tend to believe that anything that comes from overseas is better than what we have. No, but those we had out there, they were more tolerant to some of the pests and diseases that we have in now. So what we do now, in trying to improve our agriculture, we have to invest in soil and water conservation practices. We have to have the right varieties. We have to make sure that we schedule our production to reduce on the amount of loss that we're going to have, especially livestock too. Livestock, we have not talked about livestock. Livestock also, it's very important for our food security. And if you check the dynamics, livestock and crop production, they tend to be affected by the same temperature and reduced precipitation. Because if there's no water, the same way that they'll be stressed. Again, if we're in the dry season, they stress out the little water that we have. You have to give them more water because they stress out. But the more you stress out, the more water that you need. The plants also. The more stressed they are, the more evapotranspiration that you have. The little water that you have in the soil, they're going to take more water in the soil now and bring it back into the atmosphere. So it's a whole cycle of events that we have to undertake to ensure that we are able to produce enough food for the population.
Yeah, very, 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 very important critical points. We have maybe about 50 seconds more. I'm going to give about 25 and 25 for you. In the last 25 seconds, based on what you're here to do, based on the forecast, what would you like to leave us with?
I would like to leave a positive message. I think we are still in the reaction mode. I think we're getting closer to proactive movement within the sector, where we are actually looking to implement some of the things that Cletus spoke about. I just wanted to mention that although not everything from overseas is good, consultants included, we have to be sure that there are climate analogs. There are parts of the world where they are going through these types of stresses that we are predicted to have. And I know Cardi has been doing a lot of work with bringing in varieties from the South Pacific, etc. So that's not always that we're going to be looking to look inwards. There are times when we're going to be using improved germplasm from elsewhere.
Okay, we're about to round up. Speak to climate adaptation in the last 10 seconds or so for me, Christmas.
A lot can be said about climate adaptation, but I think the answer is really will really lie in terms of us being able to integrate our work. The different agencies and the different users of the resources have to work together. I think we have to integrate water use, land use, and so on, and good research, among other things. They all have to work together for us to come up with the solutions that will work for us in terms of adapting to climate change. And we have to build a resilience in doing the things that we know should be done. Protect our land, protect our soil, protect our other resources.
Okay, a very good note to end, and I want to say thank you very much. Of course, we didn't speak much about the policymakers and their input, but that's for another show. I want to thank you very much for listening to us on Issues and Answers. I'm Mr. Doxery. Until another time, bye-bye. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We'll continue just chatting.
Emphasize that persons involved in the rearing of livestock need to think of
It is the intention of government to give deliberate attention to all levels of education from
watch in preparation for any eventuality. EMAP, the national
Until the headband, who will actually make it true? Will the tables be turned?
Ibi, money, like at the top moon, but la messy go hotel, yeah, lay back.